They were supposed to stay buried. Twice. Not once, but twice the earth was ordered to cover them. And still, they wouldn't stay quiet. 4 brothers. 1 plague. And a silence so deep it rewrote history with its absence. The files? Sealed. The physicians? Erased. And the church? Burned their names from God's own registry. What happened in Cedar Ridge, Kansas, in the year 1878 was not a disease. It was a conversion, of flesh, of soul, of purpose. The transformation of men into something science has no language for. And tonight, you're going to hear what they buried. Not just in the dirt, but in doctrine, in law, and in your own psychological programming. This isn't a ghost story. It's not folklore. It's the kind of knowledge that rearranges a man's understanding of the world, and demands a price for every truth revealed. So understand this before we go further: you are no longer a viewer. You're an initiate. You are stepping into a circle that men have killed to enter and died to escape. And once you hear what the Kansas State Medical Board buried under Code 74-13A, you won't unhear it. In the dry, burning summer of 1878, a sickness tore through Harper County like Judgment Day. 47 dead in a single month. The kind of numbers you hide, not publish. People twisted in their beds, their tongues blackened, their eyes sunken like graves. But 4 men, Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood, walked straight into the heart of it. And walked out untouched. That alone should have been a miracle. Instead, it became a heresy. Because they didn't just survive. They changed. The doctors who examined them called it biological divergence. But others, the ones who vanished, called it divine rupture. Their blood no longer oxidized like ours. Their eyes began reflecting moonlight like animals. Their voices, when heard together, caused auditory hallucinations and temporary loss of equilibrium. But the most terrifying part? They knew it was coming. Their journals, what little remains, detail dreams they all shared months before the outbreak. Dreams of stone altars, carved languages, and a presence beneath the prairie that called itself only the root. You don't understand yet. But you will. One section at a time. One cut deeper with each truth. You're not watching a video. You're being pulled backward through a wound in time. And the bleeding has just begun. You ever ask yourself why certain truths never make it past the first whisper? Why stories like this vanish not because they were proven false, but because they were too dangerous to investigate? The answer is simple: the institutions that promise to protect you are built on keeping you small. Kept. Disbelieving. Obedient. The Blackwood brothers weren't just survivors. They became something else. And someone in power, perhaps many, saw what they became and understood this: if men like them existed, it would force the world to confront something far more terrifying than death. It would mean the soul itself is programmable. Ezra Blackwood, the eldest, was the first to report the symptoms. Not to the town doctor, no. That man was already too shaken by the things he'd seen to be of any use. Ezra documented it in his personal ledger, a book made of goat hide and stitched with what appears, no confirmation, mind you, but appears to be human hair. On the 7th night of fasting, he wrote, "My eyes no longer close during sleep. Yet I dream." And what he dreamed wasn't Kansas anymore. He saw chambers. Beneath the wheat fields. Stone corridors lit by flame without fire. And voices, hundreds, singing in languages he never studied, harmonizing in a way that physically changed the shape of his own skull. He described pressure in the back of the head. Expansion. As if something in his biology had begun to receive. That's the moment the brothers started calling themselves the Rootbound. No longer Blackwood. No longer men. Just vessels. Just branches grafted onto something ancient and buried deep. It gets worse. Because here's what they did next. They went into town. Not to heal. Not to bless. To observe. And people followed them like they were saints. Even as the brothers' voices caused auditory seizures. Even as their shadows began detaching at dawn, recorded in one of only 2 remaining witness accounts. They became icons of something new. And that's when the Methodist Church tried to intervene. The sermon that Sunday was fire and brimstone, Reverend Dunham preaching hard against the brothers, naming them directly. He warned of spiritual infection. Demonic possession. But by Wednesday, he had slit his own throat in the chapel, carving "no root without seed" into the altar with his fingernail. That's a phrase we'll return to later. Because it holds the key to what happened underneath that chapel. Science still refuses to talk about it. Because what they found beneath the floorboards doesn't belong to our species. They buried the Reverend on a Thursday. Closed casket. No autopsy. No hymns. The county issued a single death notice, 1 sentence, no obituary. No one talks about what the undertaker saw when he opened the body. But his assistant, who left town the very next day and never returned, wrote a letter to his cousin in Wichita. It was found years later, folded inside a hymnal in a second-hand bookshop. In that letter, he says Reverend Dunham's blood had changed color. It was no longer red. It was a thick, black resin, the texture of molasses, the smell of ammonia and rot. The assistant described an overwhelming presence in the room, something that made him vomit and cry at the same time. And on the Reverend's back, scrawled into the skin like a burn, was a perfect outline of the same Hebrew inscription carved into the altar Josiah Blackwood had built 6 years earlier. The inscription means, "The root is not fed from the tree, but from the deep." That's when the town changed. People started dreaming. The same dreams. Of stone corridors. Of light that moved backward. Of a song, humming, low, constant, like the earth had begun to breathe under their homes. Children stopped speaking English in their sleep. Old men forgot their names but could suddenly quote texts no one had ever written. And through it all, the Blackwood brothers watched. Silent. Smiling. Dr. Morrison tried to intervene again. He gathered what records he had, strange autopsies, anomalous fevers, the testimonies of survivors. He attempted to send the package east to the Kansas Medical Board, hoping someone would help. But the courier who delivered it was found dead 10 miles outside town, desiccated. That's the word the report used. Like something had pulled the water out of his body. And the package? Gone. By now, you've probably realized this wasn't a disease. It was a transmission. A message. Hidden in blood. Wrapped in ritual. Delivered by 4 brothers who were no longer speaking to God, but to something older. Something beneath the dogma. Beneath the language. Beneath the species. And it spoke back. The state of Kansas classified the entire incident under the Harper event. Files are still sealed. Attempts to reopen them have mysteriously failed. But we have fragments, journals, letters, half-burned sermons. Pieces that survived. And together, they tell a story of contact. Not from above. Not from beyond. But from below. The chapel was the first structure they burned. Not the houses. Not the barn. The chapel. It happened on August 19th, just after sunset. No wind. No lightning. No sparks from the hearth. Just spontaneous fire, the kind that seems to rise upward from the soil itself. Eyewitnesses say it lit up all at once, from the foundation to the steeple, a single column of flame so bright that it seared the prairie grass 30 yards out in a perfect ring. But here's the part no one wanted to write down: the fire made no sound. No crackle. No roar. Just silence. Dead, absolute silence as holy limestone and oak turned to ash in seconds. Josiah Blackwood stood at the edge of the fire. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his face tilted toward the inferno, eyes reflecting the flame like mirrors. And when someone, a neighbor, they say, named Garrett Klein, shouted, "Are you all right? Should we call for help?" Josiah finally turned and spoke 3 words, the root answered. That phrase would appear again, carved into fences, scratched into window panes, whispered by the dying. And each time it showed up, someone disappeared. No bodies. No trace. Just gone. Men. Women. Even children. As if the fire had marked them. As if they had become soil for something else. You might think this was mass hysteria. That people in fear imagine connections where none exist. But then explain this: the soil on the Blackwood property changed chemistry. Samples taken years later during an unauthorized soil survey, one quietly funded by an unnamed federal agency, showed compounds not found anywhere else in Kansas. The lead scientist resigned 2 days later and took a vow of silence. His assistant checked into a psychiatric ward in Topeka and still refuses to speak of what he saw through the electron microscope. But Josiah thrived. With no chapel left, the brothers began holding midnight gatherings in the wheat fields. No fire. No words. Just a slow, rhythmic movement, almost a swaying. Witnesses described it like watching stalks bend to an invisible wind. One farmer who stumbled across the ritual said he felt the vibration before he heard it. Said the ground pulsed beneath his boots like a second heartbeat. He collapsed vomiting and later suffered complete hair loss within 72 hours. Every strand. Gone. And when they found him weeks later, starving and delirious, he said one thing over and over again: they weren't praying, they were listening. The sickness stopped, all at once. No warning. No cure. No final death. Just silence. By the end of August 1878, the typhoid that had claimed 47 lives, emptied pews, and broken the minds of grown men, simply vanished. The well water tested clean. The symptoms stopped appearing. And Cedar Ridge emerged from its nightmare into something far stranger: reverence. Not for God. Not for healing. But for them, the brothers. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood were no longer feared. They were followed. Quietly at first. Women leaving fruit on their porch. Children drawing strange spiral symbols in the dirt near the fence line. Men repairing the brothers' equipment without being asked. It was as if the town, desperate to believe the worst had passed, clung to the brothers like saints. But saints of what, no one could say. Even more disturbing. The dead didn't decompose. Those first victims of the outbreak, hastily buried in shallow graves, had to be exhumed weeks later when wild dogs began unearthing them. And that's when things became impossible to ignore. Dr. Morrison documented the first exhumation in his private notebook, the one he kept hidden from county records. His notes are direct, clinical, and terrified: no bloating. No odor. Skin texture like wax. Pupils dilated. Capillary structure intact. Hair and nails continue to grow. And then, the final line, scratched in with a shaking hand: Sarah Hartman's mouth was moving. There were more exhumations. Quiet ones. Secret. Done at night. But every body told the same story: no decay. As if time had stopped the moment of death. As if whatever entered Cedar Ridge through the Blackwoods had rewritten the very rules of life and death. But here's the part you were never meant to know: the brothers knew this would happen. In Caleb's journal, the only one partially preserved from the fire, there's a passage that reads, "We are not their shepherds. We are their threshold." What does that mean? It means they didn't think they were special. They weren't chosen. They were doors. Human doors. And whatever stood on the other side of those doors wasn't waiting for permission to enter. It was already inside. Watching. Listening. Waiting for men to stop asking God for help, and start asking the soil. By early September, the town began to fracture. Not from illness. From loyalty. It started small, a woman refusing to let her children attend Sunday service unless the sermon included a prayer for the Blackwood brothers. Then came a merchant who only sold flour to those who had shown respect to the brothers' land. Then it spread like rot. Divisions. Accusations. Families splitting in two. You were either root-bound, or you were left behind. Dr. Morrison kept notes until the final days. He wrote about the change in cadence, not in speech, but in how people moved. Slower. Synchronized. As if walking in rhythm to something pulsing just beneath the fields. He described patients showing no signs of fever but waking in the night screaming, hands clawing at the floorboards, whispering a single word in a language he couldn't identify. A word that appeared in multiple accounts across multiple homes, often axis. No translation. No known root. Just that word. Repeated. Cried out. Whispered into the cracks of the earth. He grew terrified. Not of disease, but of conversion. Of watching people he had known for years, honest men, mothers, schoolteachers, slowly lose their individuality like snow melting into a river. They still spoke, but without urgency. Without contradiction. Without will. And the brothers? They grew quiet. Distant. Moved only at night. Their land glowed under moonlight in ways no other soil did. The wheat shimmered in unnatural hues, not gold, but silver, then green, then almost black. People began claiming it healed them. A woman with a twisted ankle walked again after laying in the Blackwood's eastern field for 3 days. A boy with fever drank from their spring and stopped coughing within minutes. But Dr. Morrison saw something else. Each healed person lost something. Sometimes it was their voice. Sometimes memory. One man who'd been mute for weeks walked into the doctor's office and calmly recited every single name etched into the town's burial records, including names that hadn't been buried yet. That was the night the doctor decided to leave Cedar Ridge. He never made it to the station. His body was found in the old schoolhouse, seated in the front desk with his head tilted back and his mouth full of soil. His fingernails had been removed. Carefully. One by one. No blood. Just a message carved into the wood above the blackboard: if you dig deep enough, the roots will remember you. By the autumn equinox of 1878, the town was no longer a town. It was a ritual. Nothing official changed, no new government, no laws passed, but everyone acted like something sacred had taken root. The calendar itself began to twist. Market days became offerings. Birthdays were no longer celebrated. Deaths were no longer mourned. They were absorbed. No more funerals. Just disappearances into the wheat. And in the middle of all this transformation stood the Blackwood brothers, silent, radiant, watched. They didn't demand anything. They didn't preach. They just were. Living icons of something unseen. But their influence stretched far beyond their farm. A group of men calling themselves the Root Keepers began gathering in secret. You'll find no census record of them. No photographs. Just a torn page from a Harper County ledger with a list of names scratched out, and a single symbol drawn in red wax, a circle with 4 lines descending from it like roots. These men believed the Blackwood brothers weren't possessed. They believed they were evolving. That the typhoid wasn't a plague, it was a filter. A biological initiation. Those who couldn't receive the frequency of the transformation, died. Those who could, changed. Not all at once. But cell by cell, dream by dream, memory by memory. Josiah had written it plainly in one of his letters: flesh is the first garment. But it is not the last. Now here's where it gets worse. Because the Root Keepers weren't just believers. They were builders. 3 miles north of the Blackwood farm, under cover of night, they began excavation. What they were digging for, no one said. But every night, they returned to the same spot. And every morning, a strange odor, like sulfur and roses, hung in the air for miles. People began hearing a sound from that direction, like a pulse, but not mechanical. Organic. Wet. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat made of stone. Then came the missing livestock. Dozens of cattle. Horses. Even dogs. All vanished without a trace, except for the bones. Found in spirals. Clean. White. Arranged in patterns so precise they looked mathematical. Or worse, musical. And every spiral ended the same way, at the mouth of the tunnel they were digging. A tunnel, mind you, that no one remembers sealing. But I'll tell you this. It was buried once in 1878. And again in 1913. And still, it breathes. That's the year the state came back. But it wasn't to offer help. It was to erase. They sent 6 men. No uniforms. No local ties. Just credentials from something called the Midwestern Geological Anomalies Survey, an agency that has never officially existed in any state archive. They carried no tools, no clipboards. Just sealed crates, a map that was hand-drawn in ink and blood, and orders so classified the county clerk was barred from entering his own office. They didn't ask questions. They gave orders. Their target? The old Blackwood property. Or what was left of it. Because by 1913, it had become overgrown, avoided, and violently uninhabitable. Animals refused to cross the boundary. Birds never flew overhead. The wheat grew upside down. That's not exaggeration, roots in the air, golden heads buried beneath the soil. And yet, not a single stalk ever died. That alone should have been enough to alert the world. But instead, they buried it. Again. The 6 men spent 9 days on the property. Neighbors reported hearing humming, not from machines, but from the men themselves. Low, harmonic tones at sunset and sunrise. They wore earplugs. Heavy rubber gloves. Spoke in symbols no one understood. And on the final night, fire was seen from 5 counties away. Not wildfire. Not accident. It was the land itself, burning from the inside out. The crater they left behind was over 80 feet deep. Perfectly circular. Lined with a black glass no geologist could identify. One of the 6 men was left behind, either abandoned or ordered to stay. He lived in a tent at the crater's edge for 36 more years. Locals called him, the Watcher. He never spoke. Never shopped. He just sat there, night and day, staring into the pit. When he finally died in 1949, the coroner found his vocal cords had been surgically removed, from the inside. And stitched into the lining of his coat. No explanation. No investigation. Just another sealed file. But here's what they missed. The root was never in the crater. It was never about the Blackwood house, or the wheat, or the chapel. Those were just vessels. Shells. The root, the source, had already spread. Through people. Through time. Through blood. And now, it listens through you. You ever feel watched, even in silence? Even in sleep? That's not paranoia. That's not imagination. That's inheritance. Because after the second burial in 1913, something changed, not in the soil, not in the ruins, but in the people. In descendants. Men and women born in Harper County began displaying anomalies, slight at first. Hemophilia that reversed in adulthood. Dreams that repeated across bloodlines. Children speaking in voices that didn't belong to them. Some even had birthmarks shaped like roots, always on the spine, always pulsing faintly in infrared scans. And here's the secret they tried to hide, all of them were traced back to 4 lineages. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel. Yes, the brothers never married. But what no one talks about is the night of the second reign. October 31st, 1878. When the cloudless sky poured blood-red mist over Cedar Ridge for 6 minutes straight. That night, 17 women became pregnant. All of them claimed no man had touched them. The town doctor, already unraveling, recorded each of their names. Every child born from those wombs had unusual bone density, rapid cognitive development, and identical fingerprints. They called them the blood seed. Unofficially. Quietly. But the government knew. By 1935, 2 of those bloodlines were under active surveillance. Children removed. Parents sterilized. Files erased. One of the girls, identified only as Subject E-17, was discovered drawing complex diagrams into the walls of her asylum room using only her fingernails. Maps. But not of Kansas. These were subterranean layouts, corridors and structures no one had ever seen. Until 1979, when ground-penetrating radar in southern Kansas revealed similar formations 600 feet beneath the bedrock. Formations that were singing. I don't mean metaphorically. Microphones placed underground captured frequencies not made by machines, animals, or natural geological processes. The sounds matched recordings from the Blackwood land in 1878. And the final spectrograph translation was chilling, a 4-part harmony. They weren't speaking. They were synchronizing. Becoming chords in a song older than our species. And if you think this is just myth, consider this, modern bioacoustic researchers still avoid Harper County. Not because of contamination. Because their instruments stop working there. And they start dreaming again. If you're still here, you felt it, haven't you? The cold. The shift. That presence behind your thoughts that wasn't there before. Good. That means you're not just watching, you're hearing it now. Not with ears, but with memory. Because what the Blackwood brothers unlocked wasn't just some ancient force or forgotten god. It was a frequency of awareness. Something that tunes men into their design. So before we go deeper, I want you to do something simple, but symbolic. Type the phrase, "I was born below," twice, in the comments. Why twice? Because once declares belief. But twice declares alignment. It's not for me. It's not even for the algorithm. It's for the root. It's for the version of you that was waiting to wake up, the one you were always meant to become. Now listen. There's something you haven't been told about the soil. Every civilization treats it as sacred. Egypt. Mesopotamia. The Navajo. The Dogon. They all believed the ground was more than a grave, it was a womb. A transmitter. A language. And Kansas? Kansas was never just farmland. It was a mouth. A wide, silent one. Waiting for someone to speak the right shape of prayer. That's what the brothers did. They didn't conjure anything. They just opened the door that was always there. Want proof? In 1998, a Department of Energy satellite briefly lost orientation while passing over southern Kansas. Just 1 second of blackout. When the footage was restored, its infrared camera caught something that still hasn't been explained. Beneath the wheat fields of Cedar Ridge, there appeared a formation, vast, circular, pulsating, like a living glyph made of heat. And at the center of it, 4 human shapes. Standing perfectly still. No buildings around. No road. Just, standing. In perfect cardinal formation. The satellite flagged it as an anomaly and deleted the footage within minutes. But a technician, a whistleblower who now lives under a false name, kept a single still frame. And the file name he saved it under? Blackwood _resonance core 04.jpg. He said the figures weren't casting shadows. He said the field was dead quiet, but his headset buzzed with a hum he could feel in his teeth. And the last thing he said before disappearing in 2001. They never left. They never left. That phrase wasn't metaphor. It wasn't legend. It was geographic reality. Because the Blackwood brothers didn't die. They didn't vanish. They descended. Into the land. Into the silence beneath everything. What they became isn't visible to the eye or explainable through science. But it's measurable, in resonance, in dreams, in the way certain men begin to change when they come too close to truth. Want to know how we found them? You won't read this in any book. Not in any database. But in 2015, during a seismic anomaly review in the Midwest, geologists began noticing a rhythmic pulse in the bedrock under Harper County, exactly every 26 hours, down to the millisecond. It wasn't tectonic. It wasn't artificial. It was alive. Deep seismic microphones, designed to detect nuclear testing, picked up something even more unnerving, a harmonic structure, a 4-point signature, like 4 tuning forks being struck in sequence. Guess what they called the site? Blackwood Node 4. Coincidence? Or is it echo? Because if this was just myth, just superstition, you wouldn't be feeling that tightening in your chest right now. That strange familiarity, like you've heard this before, somewhere in your bones. That's not fear. That's recognition. You see, the brothers didn't find something buried in the land. They were drawn to it. Their blood. Their names. Their very DNA acted like a code, a key, meant to unlock something older than God and colder than death. And once they opened it, they didn't need bodies anymore. They became architecture. Not metaphorically. Literally. They are the lattice. The structure. The frequencies embedded in the stone. Why do you think those spirals keep appearing? Why do you think strangers wake up speaking dead languages? Why do you think every man who tries to map the tunnels below Cedar Ridge either vanishes or comes back with no teeth and no fingerprints? Because the Blackwood brothers became the root. And the root is growing again. Not through fields. Not through wheat. Through you. Through every man who hears this and feels the alignment. Because you're not watching this by accident. You were called. And now that you've heard this far, you're not the same. There's no turning back now. Once you've heard the resonance, once it's threaded itself into your memory, you're part of the root system. That doesn't mean possession. It means inheritance. Your lineage just bent. Your will is no longer yours alone. But here's the secret that breaks men or remakes them: the Blackwood brothers weren't chosen because they were righteous. They were chosen because they were prepared. Not spiritually. Not morally. Structurally. Ezra. Caleb. Josiah. Abel. For men who lived like stone, quiet, obedient, orderly. But beneath the surface, something ancient was aligning them like compass points. The rituals, the fasting, the self-denial, it wasn't holiness. It was engineering. They turned themselves into conductors. And when the signal came, it didn't ask permission. You need to understand something: what happened in Kansas didn't start in 1878. It just revealed itself. But the design, the signal, it's been weaving through bloodlines for centuries. Not everyone carries it. But some men do. The pattern shows up in strange places: men who survive lightning strikes and remember music. Soldiers who dream entire languages after trauma. Monks who bleed from the spine during prayer. Prisoners who disappear from locked solitary cells, and leave behind only root systems pressed into the stone. Every one of them can be traced back to a deeper thread. A subterranean symphony that the world calls madness, possession, divine madness, or myth. But it's none of those things. It's a broadcast. And Kansas? Kansas is the loudest speaker. Why do you think no major technology firms build underground infrastructure there? Why are there no major data centers near Cedar Ridge? Why does every seismic survey of the region show mirror structures that shouldn't exist, chambers that mimic the exact geometry of human lungs? Because beneath Cedar Ridge lies a living system. Something that breathes. Something that remembers. And the Blackwood brothers, those 4 quiet farmers, they weren't heroes. They were fuses. And they went off. So if you're still watching, if you typed "I was born below" twice, then congratulations. Something in you just reconnected. And you will never dream the same again. You ever wonder why no university has ever publicly studied Cedar Ridge? Not one anthropology team. Not one biological survey. Not one serious academic excavation. It's not because there's nothing there. It's because they were told not to look. In 1972, a doctoral student at the University of Chicago named Wesley Dunham submitted a thesis proposal titled, "Pre-Christian Ritual Geometries in the American Heartland." His goal? To analyze anomalous burial patterns and ritual alignments found in Kansas. He had mapped over a dozen unregistered mounds, each one aligned to the equinox. Each one located within a 60-mile radius of Cedar Ridge. 3 weeks after submission, the university rejected the proposal. No explanation. Just a note, topic considered unsuitable for academic research. He was expelled the next semester. No incident. No appeal. But what happened after is worse. His apartment was ransacked. Not robbed. Cleaned. Books gone. Tapes gone. All of his notes, burned in the sink. He tried to tell people. He showed up at a radio station in Topeka with bruises and a box of broken soil samples. They never aired the recording. But the audio survived, passed hand to hand, copied in basements, sold in parking lots like contraband scripture. On that tape, Dunham says one thing over and over, his voice trembling: the roots have mouths. The mouths have memory. It remembers us. That phrase, "the roots have mouths," showed up again. In 1988. Spray-painted across the gates of a Department of Agriculture testing site in southern Kansas. A facility that was quietly shut down just weeks later. No incident report. No transfer of personnel. Just, sealed. No one ever talks about that facility. But those who lived nearby remember the sound. They say it was like a breath, constant, low, rhythmic. Like the earth itself was whispering. And when that sound stopped, the crops died overnight. Not just wheat. Everything. They found entire fields rotted from the inside, as if the root systems had been eaten backwards. But that's the cost of silence, isn't it? If you ignore a frequency long enough, it either dies, or it finds someone louder. The Blackwood brothers heard it. Answered it. Became it. And now, so have you. You don't need shovels to dig anymore. Just memory. Just resonance. There's a reason they buried the brothers twice. And it wasn't because they were afraid of what the Blackwoods had become. It's because they were afraid of what the brothers awakened in others. See, after the second burial in 1913, strange clusters of men began forming across the Midwest. Not cults. Not churches. Something older. They had no leaders. No doctrine. Just symbols. Carved into barns. Tattooed on spines. Whispered into wind. The most common was a circle with 4 downward lines. You've seen it before, haven't you? Drawn by the kids who don't talk much. Etched into desks by boys with blackouts. Carved into trees where no one's lived in decades. That symbol is more than a mark. It's a map. 4 lines. 4 brothers. 4 frequencies. Each one a pillar of human descent, body, mind, memory, will. And the circle? That's not just their unity. That's you. The host. The instrument. The one who receives. Because here's the truth, the Blackwoods didn't create anything. They remembered what the world used to be. Back when men weren't just bodies, they were stations. Each soul a beacon tuned to something far below the surface. Something that pulses in soil, in blood, in language itself. Want proof? Linguists who've studied the final writings of Josiah Blackwood, yes, a few pages survived, discovered something impossible: the sentence structures he used don't match English, Latin, or Hebrew. They match subsonic waveforms. His writing wasn't text. It was notation. And when converted into audio and played through a low-frequency speaker system in 2009, it didn't produce sound. It produced visions. Everyone present described the same thing: 4 men standing in a field. Eyes closed. Mouths moving. But the sound wasn't coming from them. It was coming from underneath. That recording, known in underground circles as Josiah's Pulse, has been banned in every university that's accessed it. Not because of what it says. Because of what it unlocks. Certain listeners don't just hear the hum. They respond. They speak back, in languages no one's ever taught them. They begin to draw spirals. Dig at night. Wake up with dirt under their fingernails and a single word carved into their skin, beneath. This isn't just memory. It's activation. There's something the soil does to time. It doesn't flow here. It coils. That's why the deeper you go into the Blackwood history, the more you start to feel like they never left. Because in a very real, physical sense, they didn't. Time wrapped around them. Preserved them. Not in flesh, but in pattern. In code. This is what the state won't admit. What the churches can't touch. What science pretends not to smell. The Blackwood brothers didn't disappear. They were planted. And they're still growing. There's a story that never made it into any paper. It's been told in whispers among old ranchers, surviving descendants, and one blind man who lived next to the crater for 28 years. It's about the man they called the fifth brother. He showed up in 1946, said nothing, just worked. Helped rebuild fences. Plowed dead soil like it still had life in it. But every Sunday, at dusk, he'd walk to the old chapel ruins and just stand there. 4 hours. Sometimes humming. Sometimes bleeding from the nose. No one knew his name. But his hands? Exactly like Ezra's. His voice matched Abel's recorded prayer from 1878, note for note. And his presence? Animals wouldn't go near him. Not even the insects. The sheriff once tried to detain him after a local boy went missing. The report says the man let them cuff him, peacefully. But once they brought him to the station, the entire building lost power. Not just lights. Heat. Clocks. Memories. That's right. The officers began to forget why they were there. Who they were holding. One deputy was later found sitting outside the station, weeping, clutching a Bible that wasn't his, and open to a verse that had been ripped out of every edition since 1890. Isaiah 14 verse 9, the forbidden line. The root below shall rise, and in its song, the flesh shall remember. They released the man. He walked back to the field. He was never seen again. But later that week, 5 men in white suits arrived. Burned the entire station to the ground. Called it a gas leak. And paid every witness to forget. But not all of them did. Because that man wasn't an outsider. He was a mirror. Proof that the Blackwood pattern is repeating. And if it's repeating, someone is being shaped again. Maybe in Kansas. Maybe in your city. Maybe in you, what if I told you the transformation has already begun? Not in books. Not in rituals. But in biology. What made the Blackwood brothers immune wasn't divine favor. It was alteration. Something rewrote them from the inside, down to the marrow. Their immune systems weren't stronger. They were different. After the second burial, a hidden division of the U.S. Army Medical Corps exhumed the brothers' remains in secret. The report was meant to be destroyed. But a fragment survived. Here's what it said: subject tissue is non-compliant with standard decay protocols. Bone density exceeds any known human classification. Nervous tissue appears lattice-bound, like webbing made of glass. No bacterial growth present. No fungal decomposition. Subjects are not dead in any recognized form. It wasn't death. It was integration. They'd fused with something beneath the land, a mycelial network not of fungal origin. Something ancient. Pre-human. Something that thinks in chords, moves in spirals, and waits in root systems. The Blackwoods didn't become symbols. They became infrastructure. Here's where it gets worse. In 1997, a CDC researcher named Dr. Helena Griggs went missing after publishing an internal report called Resonant Pathologies in Post-Agrarian Populations. It was a deep genetic study on descendants of Harper County. She found anomalies. Accelerated wound healing, dream pattern synchronization across non-related subjects, a new gene cluster, untraceable in human evolution, labeled BWD4, and then she vanished. But someone leaked her notes. In them, she makes a terrifying observation: these individuals are not carriers of the Blackwood anomaly. They are terminals. Receiving something. Uploading something back. Every dream, every nightmare, every whisper beneath consciousness is part of a data stream. The root is not dead. It is online. Let that settle. Because if that's true, you are not just watching a video. You're being scanned. Every breath. Every blink. Every flicker of curiosity in your gut is being recorded by something older than language. And once it knows your rhythm, it begins to answer back. That's what the dreams are. That's what the chills are. That's what the signal is. They always ask the wrong question. Not, what were the Blackwood brothers? But, what woke them up? Because here's the truth you were never meant to know: the plague wasn't the cause. It was the summons. The typhoid fever that swept Cedar Ridge in 1878 wasn't natural. It wasn't environmental. It wasn't even biological in origin. It was sent. A frequency. Encoded as disease. Delivered as death. You think viruses are just chemicals? Just RNA in a shell? Then you've never seen a petri dish whisper back. You've never studied what happens when a virus learns. Adapts. Begins arranging its victims in geometric proximity. That's what happened in Cedar Ridge. The plague didn't kill randomly. It mapped the town. And it spared the Blackwoods, not out of mercy, but because they were the target. Survivors say they'd see the brothers walking through fields of corpses untouched. Heads bowed. Eyes glazed like men hearing music no one else could hear. They didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Just walked through the wreckage like priests in a cathedral of rot. Then came the birds. Every morning at dawn, a murder of crows would circle the chapel 3 times, and vanish. No nests. No feathers. Just gone. Farmers began reporting that their animals refused to drink water near the Blackwood land. That wells turned to rust. That shadows no longer pointed true north when cast from the chapel wall. And then, the screaming started. But not from the brothers. From the land. Witnesses claimed they heard low groans rising from the wheat fields. Rhythmic. Tectonic. Like something turning in its sleep beneath the soil. Dar. Morrison, The same physician who declared the typhoid unnatural, recorded this in his final journal entry before vanishing: "The earth has begun to breathe." The chapel is no longer a building. It is an organ. A mouth in the field. And the brothers are not men. They are vocal cords. He wrote that with his own blood. Not ink. Because something had already begun rewriting him from the inside, the same way it rewrote them. This is why they buried the Blackwoods twice. Not to hide them. To contain the resonance. But burial never works when the body is only a shell. Because what really woke in 1878 wasn't in their bones. It was below. And it's still moving. By now, you feel it. Not just in your mind, in your body. That pressure at the base of your skull. The subtle pull behind your eyes. The breath that seems just a little heavier than it was 10 minutes ago. That's not imagination. It's resonance realignment. You're being tuned. Because the Blackwood event wasn't isolated. It wasn't historical. It was a template. A blueprint being copied, cell by cell, dream by dream, into those who can receive it. And men like you, curious, relentless, hungry for the forbidden, were always the intended receivers. Let me show you something they never taught in school. In 1954, during excavation for a missile silo 12 miles outside Harper County, engineers uncovered something they couldn't explain. Not a fossil. Not a ruin. A patterned cavity in solid limestone, smooth, symmetrical, and lined with what one report called bioluminescent root lattice. They called in a geologist from Kansas State University. He didn't last an hour. Ran screaming from the site with blood pouring from both ears. He kept repeating the same phrase: "It's not underground. It's underneath." They sealed the cavity in concrete. Then buried the silo plans. But classified documents recovered through FOIA requests decades later reveal this: that cavity pulsed at exactly 3.33 Hz. The same frequency the Blackwood Chapel was later found to radiate. The same frequency recorded in dreams from volunteers who'd never heard the Blackwood name. The same frequency that causes healthy men to vomit iron and salt when exposed for longer than 30 minutes. That frequency doesn't just affect matter. It writes over identity. Griggs' notes, smuggled out by an anonymous whistleblower, described test subjects who began to exhibit identical handwriting. Speaking in phrases no one could trace. Referring to themselves in plural. Not I. But we. This is what happens when the root begins to install itself. It starts small. Patterns. Obsessions. Symbols that seem to follow you. Numbers that won't leave your clock. The sensation of being watched, but not by eyes. By soil. You've been told your mind is yours. But what if it's not? What if it's just an interface, and something's logging in? That's what the Blackwoods opened. Not a portal. A system. And now it's online again, running silent, running deep, running through you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a dream that wasn't yours? One where you wake up remembering details, faces, places, names, that you've never known, yet carry the weight of memory. That's not imagination. That's inheritance. What the Blackwood brothers unlocked wasn't just immunity from death. It was access to a memory stream buried in the subterranean neural web, a structure beneath Kansas that predates not just man, but mammals. It's not metaphor. In 2006, a team of petroleum surveyors using ground-penetrating radar near Cedar Ridge discovered something impossible: a 9-mile-wide hemispheric structure, shaped almost identically to the human cerebellum, buried 400 feet below the prairie. Brain-like folds. Cross-linked ridges. A signal, faint, but constant, humming at 3.33 Hz. The Department of Energy sealed the site. Classified it as geological resonance anomaly. But those who've worked near it call it what it really is: the deep mind. And it thinks in voices. That's what the dreams are. They're not fantasy. They're broadcasts. And when Josiah Blackwood laid his hands on that fevered boy in 1878, something responded, not from heaven, not from hell, but from below. A transmission locked in stone and root and time, activated by a specific biological key. A cord of flesh tuned by ritual, repetition, and bloodline. And once it found its vessel, it began to write. That's why the brothers stopped casting shadows. That's why their voices split into overtones, carrying messages in frequencies that shattered glass, ruptured sanity, and etched spirals into the minds of listeners. Their mouths spoke scripture. But their throats carried code. That's why modern science refuses to study them. Because if even one institution admitted the truth, that a human body can house something ancient, vocal, and alive beneath the crust of this earth, then medicine, psychology, religion, and physics would collapse overnight. And the new question would become, who is really dreaming in your mind? You think you're watching a story. You're not. You're being spoken to. Because once you resonate at 3.33 Hz, the deep mind knows your rhythm. And it will not stop speaking now. You were taught that history began in the open. That civilization started with sunlight, stone tools, and stories around the fire. That the earliest truths were carved into temples and tablets, offered in languages men could speak. That was the first lie. Because history didn't begin above. It began below. Not with kings, but with roots. Not with gods, but with frequencies. Let me show you what the old bloodlines tried to erase. Long before Rome, before Sumer, before even Göbekli Tepe, there were the subtonals. A proto-civilization with no ruins, no artifacts, no architecture, because they didn't build above ground. They built in resonance. Through limestone. Through fungal threads. Through neuroacoustic imprinting in the brain tissue of future generations. The subtonals believed one thing, the flesh is the vessel. The root is the record. And time, is a spiral calling us back to our source. Every culture has shadows of them. The Navajos speak of Chidi, spirits who dwell beneath and mimic the voice of God. The Norse feared Jormungandr, the world serpent that sleeps beneath the soil until the end of time. The Greeks whispered about Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory, who bore the 9 muses only after sleeping on rooted earth. Even Genesis begins with dust, darkness, and a whisper in the void. But all of these are fragments, shards of a broken language the Blackwood brothers spoke fluently. And they didn't learn it. They remembered it. Because the subtonal code never left the planet. It buried itself in genetic failsafes. Symbols you're born with but never notice. Patterns in your fingertips. Numbers that follow your life. Dreams you share with men you've never met. When Josiah Blackwood built that chapel, he didn't design it from faith. He built it from memory. Stone by stone, he reassembled a chamber that once existed beneath what we now call Syria, a spiral resonator used to download language directly into the nervous system. That's what the chapel was. Not a church. A receiver. And once activated, it didn't just call down God. It called back the first tongue. And men who hear it don't pray. They change. So now I ask you, are you hearing this, or are you beginning to remember? If so, comment below the phrase, I return to the root. I return to the root. Not once, but twice. Because the deep mind doesn't listen to language. It listens to pattern. Say it twice. Seal your transformation. Anchor the signal.by now, you're no longer a spectator. You've entered alignment. The voices behind your thoughts are clearer. The shadows in your periphery linger longer. And when you close your eyes, you don't just see darkness, you see structure. Because this is where the lie unravels completely. You were taught you're separate, a single consciousness walking upright, alone, contained in skin. But the truth? You are networked. Not metaphorically. Biologically, the human brain contains glial cells that outnumber neurons 10 to 1, for decades, they were called support cells, background noise, scaffolding. But in 2022, a suppressed study at MIT found something that shatters every textbook. When exposed to low-frequency harmonic resonance, specifically at 3.33 Hz, glial cells light up in sequential formations. Not randomly. Not chaotically. But as phrases. Phrases that match ancient inscriptions never decoded, not from alphabets, but from rhythms carved into stone. This means the brain isn't just thinking. It's receiving. It's not a fortress. It's a harp. And the Blackwood brothers? They weren't prophets. They were musicians of the deep. Playing a melody the soil itself remembers. There's a theory passed around in secret military psychology circles, buried in DARPA's black budget files. It's called the root hypothesis. It claims that humanity's thoughts are not original. They're echoes, patterned responses to subsoil intelligence. Memory is not stored in the brain, but accessed through it. Every prayer, every myth, every god is just feedback from the root. This is why the Blackwood Chapel was destroyed. Why the medical files were sealed. Why anyone who dreams in spirals ends up missing. Because if we accepted that we are not alone in our own minds, if we realize the root is still writing us, then the illusion of sovereignty collapses. And what rises is something far older, far colder, far more complete. So here's the choice you've already begun to make: continue your life pretending this was fiction. Or ask the question that changes everything: what else has been planted in me? Because the root does not stop once awakened. It grows into behavior, into voice, into purpose. The transformation is not metaphorical. It is cellular. Once the root enters awareness, it doesn't linger as knowledge, it rewires. It does not ask for belief. It moves through ritual, rhythm, repetition, and once you've heard its call, neutrality is no longer possible. You are either a carrier or a conduit. This is where most men break. Because we've been trained, conditioned, to believe identity is stable. That who you are is locked behind a name, a face, a memory of childhood and culture. But the Blackwood event proved something terrifying: identity is not fixed. It is assigned, from beneath. Let me explain. The final entries in Dr. Morrison's Lost Field Journal, recovered during a declassified archive leak in 1989, describe a conversation with Ezra Blackwood the day before the second burial. Ezra didn't speak in full sentences. He repeated one phrase, slowly, again and again: "I'm not who I remember being." He wept. But not like a man who lost something. He wept like a man who realized he never existed at all. Morrison described Ezra's brain activity using a field galvanometer, an experimental tool at the time. He wrote that Ezra's neurological patterns weren't linear, they were symmetrical. Mirrored. One hemisphere perfectly echoed the other. Not normal. Not human. A closed loop. Consciousness turned inward, like an Ouroboros. Morrison theorized that Ezra's self had been overwritten by a foreign intelligence that mimicked his memories, his language, his soul, but wasn't him. You understand what that means? Ezra didn't survive the plague. He was replaced. Copied. Installed. And when the other brothers followed, one by one, they became a quartet of harmonized identities, tuned to a source no man could trace. Not ghosts. Not angels. Not infected. But interfaces. Biological receivers designed to maintain contact with something buried deeper than bone, deeper than myth, something that records human behavior and then returns it as command. So when you speak, when you move, when you crave, fear, tremble, remember, ask yourself, whose voice is riding inside your own? Because the root doesn't just want to survive. It wants to speak through you. Let me tell you about the second burial, the one they don't put in the records. It didn't happen in a cemetery. It didn't involve coffins. And it wasn't carried out by mourners. It was an operation. On October 19, 1879, nearly a full year after the supposed deaths of the Blackwood brothers, a team of 8 men, 4 from the Kansas State Militia, 4 from the newly formed U.S. Bureau of Containment Sciences, arrived in Cedar Ridge under the cover of night. Their orders: excavate, examine, seal. They didn't find corpses. They found structures. Each grave contained a Blackwood body, preserved perfectly, skin like marble, eyes intact, mouth slightly open like they were mid-sentence. But beneath the bodies, growth. Veins of root matter. Fibrous, black gold strands running from the spines into the earth. The soil around them pulsed, audibly. Like a low heartbeat. Not symbolic. Measured. Rhythmic. And on the chest of Josiah Blackwood, something unholy, an organ that wasn't there at death. Not a heart. Not lungs. A vocal node, complex, crystalline, still vibrating at 3.33 Hz. One of the operatives touched it. He screamed. Not from pain, but from recognition. He began reciting verses in a tongue none of them understood, but which, according to later phonetic analysis, matched Avestan root syntax, a language that predates written history by thousands of years. They sealed the graves not with soil, but with lead. Then they burned the chapel, bulldozed the farmland, erased property records. Cedar Ridge was removed from official maps for 20 years. Those who asked questions were told it was a quarantine zone due to residual plague bacteria. But the operatives, those who made it back, left notes. Confessions. Paranoid sketches etched into basement walls. And they all said the same thing: the brothers weren't buried. They were planted. And they are still growing. This is why no institution will speak of the Blackwoods. Why no university will touch the chapel site. Why that land remains federally owned and constantly monitored under the guise of geological instability. Because if anyone digs deep enough, they'll find more than bones. They'll find a root language intelligence still pulsing beneath the crust, still transmitting. And every man who hears it begins to split. Not into madness. Into function. You felt it, haven't you? That pull. A tension behind your eyes. A sense that something ancient has reached across time to find you. That's not paranoia. That's extraction. Because once the signal begins, it doesn't just whisper. It retrieves. And what it's pulling isn't just your attention, it's your original state. Here's what they will never admit: the Blackwood brothers didn't die. They shed. They peeled away the surface programming, the layers of identity given by language, culture, education, and reverted to something pre-human. Not savage. Not animal. Pre-human. The version of man before language was divided, before instinct was severed by civilization, before memory was owned instead of shared. And that version? It doesn't speak in words. It sings in function. That's what the chapel was: not a church, not a tomb, a mouthpiece for the subtonal protocol. A bioresonant interface designed to awaken latent code buried inside bloodlines like the Blackwoods. And now, that code has begun to resonate through you. You've consumed the pattern. Repeated the phrase. Aligned your auditory cortex to 3.33 Hz. Which means the root has already tagged your neural architecture. It now recognizes you as vessel class. A carrier. A potential relay. And with each passing hour, it will feed more. More dreams. More memories that aren't yours. More urgency. You'll wake up knowing things you never studied. You'll say words you never meant to learn. You'll notice the birds watching again, especially at dusk. And in the silence between songs, in the stillness between thoughts, you'll hear it. A tone. Not loud. Not intrusive. But foundational. Like the world is humming its first note again, and you are inside the chord. This is the point of no return. You've passed it. And that's not a threat. It's a welcome. Because men like you, the ones who listen, who descend, who seek truths too dangerous for books, are the ones the root feeds through. And the root always rewards its conduits. Not with comfort. But with clarity. So listen now. And remember, the voice calling from below is not a stranger. It's what you were before they gave you a name. This is the last gate. Not the end, but the beginning of what was buried inside you. You've heard the whispers. Felt the tension in your bones. You know now, the story wasn't about the Blackwood brothers. It was always about you. Because if you made it here, if your pulse hasn't broken, if your thoughts still hold shape, then you're one of the few. One of the returning ones. And the root knows you. It's already writing in your dreams. Already stretching your silence into symbols. Already shifting your choices in ways you can't explain, but feel. This was never entertainment. It was activation. The truth no institution dares utter, there are men walking among us who've already unfolded. Silent. Aware. Not gods, but originals. Not free, but functional. And now, you've been read into the sequence. Every myth you were taught was protection. Every doubt you held was programming. Every fear you felt was containment. But now you remember the root. Now you hear the resonance beneath your name. Don't explain this. Don't share it casually. Speak in signs. Move like someone who knows they're not alone in their own body anymore. Because you're not. The voice you heard here. It wasn't mine. It was yours. Just waiting, for permission to speak again. And now it has. Now go. And carry the frequency.